wind came screaming down from the ridgeline, dragging the cold with it like a wolf dragging its kill. Every tree stood bowed, their branches groaning under the weight of snow. For miles there was no sound but the endless roar of the storm, and yet, beneath it, something human lingered. A broken gasp, thin and fading. She was there in the drift, iron shackles pinning her to a stake driven cruelly into the earth. Whoever had done it hadn't meant for her to last the night. Her wrists were bloodied where the metal bit into them, her breath shallow enough that the next one might not come. Snow clung to her lashes, her hair frozen in brittle strands against her face. Up the slope, a man cut his way through the storm. His strides were heavy but steady, each one leaving a deep print behind. He wasn't following a trail. He was answering something older than that. A feeling, a pull. Some whisper that had no words but drove him down into the valley where the wind knifed through the trees. When he saw her, he stopped dead. At first it didn't look real, just another cruel trick of the winter. But then her head lifted, ever so slightly, and her lips moved. No sound reached him over the storm, but the plea was clear. A woman. Shackled. Dying. The mountain man's jaw tightened. He'd seen the wilderness kill in 100 ways. Avalanche, wolf, hunger, frost. But this wasn't the work of nature. This was men. Men who'd left her to die in chains. And in that moment, with the snow piling deeper around her, he made a promise in the silence of his own chest. Not while I'm breathing. The man dropped to his knees beside her, the snow swallowing him up to his thighs. Her skin was pale as bleached bone, lips blue, eyes fluttering like a candle fighting for its last flame. He pressed his hand to her cheek. Ice. Too much ice. Stay with me, he muttered, though he wasn't sure if she could tone. You'd hear. The shackles were thick, iron bands cinched around her wrists and ankles, their links fastened to a stake hammered deep into the frozen ground. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted her dead, they wanted her forgotten. He pulled the hunting knife from his belt and set its edge to the lock, testing. No use. The steel was too strong, the cold too cruel. He tossed the knife aside and reached for the small hatchet strapped to his pack. The handle felt warm in his hands compared to her frozen skin. He swung. Once. Twice. The ringing of metal on metal cut through the storm like church bells, sharp and desperate. Sparks spat into the night. The woman flinched weakly, as if even the sound cost her what little strength she had left. Easy, he said, lowering his voice. I've got you. The shackles split on the third strike. He caught her wrist before it hit the ground, gently rubbing the skin where blood had pooled beneath the iron. She whimpered faintly, the smallest proof that life still clung to her. One by one he worked the rest of them loose, each blow echoing into the storm like defiance. By the time the final band gave way, his arms ached and sweat froze against his brow. But she was free. He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his bearskin coat around her shaking body. She was weightless, brittle as a half-burnt log. For a moment, he just held her, feeling the small tremor of breath against his ribs. And then he rose, cradling her close, turning back toward the long trail he'd cut through the snow. Behind him, the broken shackles lay half-buried, already vanishing beneath the storm. Ahead, somewhere, there was shelter, a fire, life, and he would carry her to it. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the trees, rattling the branches until they groaned like old timbers. Each step the mountain man took sank knee-deep, and the weight of the woman in his arms threatened to drag him down. Still, he did not stop. Her head lolled against his chest, strands of frozen hair stuck to his coat. He pressed his chin to her temple and whispered, "Not much farther. Just keep breathing. That's all you have to do." The snow clawed at his eyes. His lungs burned with every breath. The ridge ahead looked endless, but beyond it lay his cabin, rough-hewn walls, a stone hearth, and a fire that never truly died. He clung to the thought like a prayer. Halfway up the rise, he felt her go limp, Panic surged through him. He stopped, shifting her gently in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered half shut. Her lips barely moved. "Please." The word was barely more than a breath, fragile as frost. "I'm here," he said quickly. "You're not alone anymore." He set her down on a patch of snow-swept rock, fumbling for the flask at his belt. He pressed it to her lips. A trickle of whiskey touched her tongue. She coughed weakly, but her eyes opened just a fraction wider. "That's it," he murmured. "Stay with me." Her hand twitched against his chest. Thin, trembling fingers curled into his coat, as if clinging to the last solid thing in the world. He gathered her up again and pushed forward, every step fueled now not by his own strength, but by the desperate weight of her life in his arms. At last, through the swirl of white, a shadow took shape. Square lines against the storm. His cabin. Smoke drifted faintly from its chimney. He had banked the fire before heading out. Thank God. Stumbling the last few yards, he kicked the door open with his boot. The sudden rush of warmth hit him like a wave. Inside, the fire still glowed in the hearth, embers waiting to be stoked. He lowered her carefully onto the bed of furs by the fire, her body trembling violently as the warmth touched her. Kneeling beside her, he stripped off her frozen boots and wrapped her feet in wool. Then he pulled the heavy bearskin tighter around her frame. Her lips moved again. A whisper. He bent closer. "Don't leave me." The words cut through him sharper than any wind outside. He took her hand, holding it tight between his calloused palms. "Not in this life. Not while I still draw breath." The storm raged outside, but in that cabin, a battle greater than the blizzard had begun. The fight to keep her alive through the night. The fire crackled low, filling the cabin with its soft, relentless song. The mountain man crouched before it, feeding it pine logs one after another until the flames leapt high, licking at the chimney stones. Heat pressed against his face, sweat beading beneath his hat, but when he turned back to the woman on the bed of furs, her skin was still pale as wax. He worked with a rough patience, the kind forged by years alone in the wilderness. He rubbed her arms and legs with wool, driving the cold out bit by stubborn bit. He poured a little more whiskey between her lips, just enough to warm her throat. Each time her eyes fluttered open, he spoke low and steady, like a man coaxing a colt to stand. "You're safe now. You hear me. No chains, no cold, just fire and shelter." Her breaths came shallow, but steadier. When at last her trembling eased, he draped another blanket across her and sat back on his heels, the crackling fire casting shadows over his face. For a long while he simply listened, to the storm beating on the roof, to her faint breaths, to his own heart pounding like a drum in his ears. Then her voice broke the quiet, weak, halting. "They left me." His head snapped up. She was awake, eyes half-lidded but burning with something deeper than frost. "Who?" he asked gently. Her throat worked as she tried to swallow. "Men. Riders. Said I'd taken what wasn't mine. Said shackles would teach me." The mountain man's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty on the frontier, but to leave someone bound in the snow was no punishment. It was murder. "Where?" he pressed. She shook her head weakly, tears freezing against her temples. I don't know. They blindfolded me, dragged me out there." Her hand twitched toward her wrists, rubbed raw and swollen. Said no one would. Said no one. "Find me." His gaze followed the welts, the dark bruises ringing her skin where iron had bitten deep. He swallowed hard, rage flickering beneath the calm he wore like armor. He laid his hand over hers, steady and firm. "They were wrong. Someone did find you." Her eyes filled, softening with something that looked like trust. For the first time, she didn't look like she was slipping away. She looked like she might hold on. The mountain man sat back, his shadow long against the firelit wall. Whoever those men were, they hadn't just left her to the cold. They had left a trail of vengeance that now ran through his cabin. and he was not a man to ignore such a trail. Dawn came grey and slow, the storm easing but leaving the world outside buried under a fresh weight of snow. The mountain man stepped to the cabin's single window, breath clouding the glass as he peered out. No tracks. No smoke on the horizon. Just silence. The kind that settles heavy after a blizzard, when even the crows stay still. Behind him, a soft cough pulled his attention. He turned. She was awake, propped weakly against the furs, her eyes clearer than the night before. He crossed the room with a steaming tin cup in his hands. "Drink. Broth'll put some strength back in you." Her fingers shook as she reached, but he steadied the cup against her lips until she managed a few sips. A faint color returned to her cheeks, though her wrists, raw and torn, made him grit his teeth. "You kept me alive," she whispered. He shook his head. "The fire did most of the work. I just kept feeding it." Her gaze lingered on him, searching his weathered face, as if trying to decide what kind of man would drag a stranger from death's edge. At last, she spoke again, voice stronger this time. "They said I stole from them, but I didn't." He set the cup aside. "Men that'd chain a woman in the snow don't sound like the kind I'd take at their word." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "They wanted to make an example, said no one in town would dare cross them if they left me to freeze." The mountain man crouched near the fire, tossing in another log. Sparks leapt upward, scattering into the chimney. His mind turned dark. He'd lived long enough in these highlands to know the kind of men who ruled small towns through fear. Ranch lords, claim jumpers, gamblers with pistols always close to hand. "Do you know their names?" he asked without looking at her. She nodded faintly. "One, Crowder. He wore a scar over his cheek, left side. The others, I never saw their faces clear, but they laughed while they chained me." The mountain man straightened, his broad frame filling the cabin's dim light. Scarred men with cruel laughter. He'd heard of them. Outlaws who had drifted through the valleys before. The kind who thought the cold itself could serve as their executioner. He moved to the door, pulling on his heavy coat, his rifle slung across his back. Her voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" He glanced back, eyes steady as the snow outside. "To cut more wood, to hunt meat, and—" His hand lingered on the latch. "To listen. Word travels, even in winter." She held his gaze. In her expression was both fear and something else, the fragile beginnings of hope. "Will they come looking?" she asked. The mountain man's jaw set hard. "If they do, they'll find a fire burning hotter than the snow they left you in." The storm outside had broken, but another kind of storm, one carried on boots and hooves in the hearts of men who thought cruelty was power, was just beginning to gather. The mountain held its breath in the days that followed. The storm had blown itself out, leaving the trees coated in glassy ice and the drifts waist-deep. From the cabin door, the man could see no fresh tracks but his own. Still, he kept his rifle close. Winter had a way of hiding things, both beasts and men. Inside, the fire never went out. He split wood each morning, stacking it high again, the wall, and smoked strips of venison from the deer he'd brought down, the cabin filled with the scent of it, a quiet promise of survival. The girl grew stronger, though the wounds at her wrists still burned red and angry. Sometimes she slept deep, and sometimes she woke with a start, gasping as if the chains still held her. He never asked her to tell the whole story, not yet, but every day she gave him more. "They hated me," she whispered one night while the wind rattled the shutters. "Not because I stole, because I wouldn't bow. Crowder runs the town, owns the saloon, the freight lines, even the sheriff won't raise a hand against him." The mountain man said nothing at first. He just fed another log into the fire, watching the sparks leap upward. Finally, he asked, "And you? Why'd he chain you out there?" She turned her face toward the shadows. "Because I said no. He wanted me to marry him, to stand by his side so he could use me like another possession. When I refused," her voice faltered, "he decided to make an example of me. said no woman in his town would ever say no again. The man's hands tightened against his knees, his knuckles whitened in the firelight. Men like Crowder, he muttered, think winter will do their killing for them. Think no one's got the grit to stand against them. Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the fire's crackle. Then, from somewhere deep in the timber, a sound carried on the frozen air. Faint, but sharp enough that the mountain man stiffened. Hooves, more than one. He rose, went to the window, and pulled the hide curtain aside just enough to peer through. Down below, where the trail cut along the frozen creek, 3 black shapes moved slow against the snow. Riders. They've come, he said flatly. Her face went pale. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. It's them, I know it is. He turned back, eyes steady. Here's a whetted blade. Then we'll be ready. She shook her head. You don't understand. They'll burn this cabin. They'll kill you for helping me. The mountain man reached for his rifle, the weight of it familiar in his hands. He slid a shell into the chamber with a metallic click that cut through the quiet like thunder. Let 'em try, he said. This fire doesn't go out easy. Not now. Not ever. The riders were still a ways off, shadows creeping closer through the white wilderness. But the line had been drawn. The girl they left to freeze had been pulled back from death, and the man who'd saved her had no intention of letting her be taken again. The snow was about to drink more than silence. The riders came slow along the frozen creek, their horses snorting steam into the bitter air. Leather creaked, iron jingled faintly, and every sound carried like a shout through the stillness. The girl pressed herself against the log wall, eyes wide, breath shallow. The mountain man stood at the window, rifle resting steady against the sill. He counted them in silence. 3. No more, no less. That made him uneasy. Crowder never did anything small. They stopped just below the slope, their voices carrying upward. Cabin, one of them barked. We seen smoke. You're harboring a thief, mountain man. Turn her over and maybe Crowder lets you keep your skin. The man's jaw clenched. His breath clouded the glass as he watched. He didn't answer. Another rider leaned forward in his saddle. Don't play dumb. She's marked. She's Crowder's property. You got no business taking what belongs to him. The girl's whisper cut the air behind him, sharp with terror. Don't speak to them, please, if they know I'm here. They already know, he said, quiet but firm. He glanced back at her, eyes steady. But you're not theirs to take. She shook her head, voice trembling. You'll die for me. Don't do this. The man turned back to the window, his thumb sliding slow across the rifle's worn stock. He raised his voice then, clear as mountain water. She's not yours. She's not anyone's. You. Best ride back down that trail, he called, voice carrying over the snow, because the next shot don't miss. For a long moment no one moved. The riders looked at one another, weighing fear against pride. Finally, with a curse, the leader spat into the ice and yanked his horse around. This ain't over, he shouted. Crowder'll come himself. Their hooves pounded away, swallowed by the timber and the cold. Silence settled back over the cabin. The girl slumped against the wall, tears streaking down her raw cheeks. He won't stop. He'll come for me again. The mountain man lowered his rifle, setting it careful against the wall. Then he crouched beside her, his voice low, steady, and certain. Then he'll find out what winter really means. Outside, the snow fell soft again, covering the rider's trail. Inside, the fire crackled steady and alive, as if daring the world to try and snuff it out. 3 nights passed. The cabin sat heavy in the storm, snow piling against the roof and drifting high across the doorway. The girl hardly slept. Each gust of wind felt like a warning, each creak of ice in the trees like the groan of a saddle. The mountain man went about his work as if nothing changed, chopping wood, checking his traps, tightening the shutter hinges against the wind. But she could see the tension in him. He watched the ridges more often now. He lingered by the rifle when he thought she wasn't looking. On the 4th morning, the dogs began to growl low in their throats, not the bark of fox or elk, but something heavier. Someone was coming. The girl froze by the fire, her breath sharp. "It's him!" The mountain man didn't answer. He slipped the rifle from its peg, loaded it smooth, and stepped to the door. When he opened it, the cold cut inside like a knife. Through the falling snow, a single rider came slow up the trail. Big man, broad-shouldered even under a gentle wolf fur coat. His horse plowed the drifts with steady power, and chained to his saddle horn swung an iron length of broken shackle, like a trophy. Crowder. He reined up not 20 yards from the cabin, the steam from his horse rising thick in the frozen air. His voice carried deep and sure. "You took what's mine, mountain man." He pointed with a gloved hand toward the cabin. "Give her back, or I take her, and your blood with her." The girl staggered to the doorway, clutching the frame, her face drained of all color at the sight of him. Her lips moved, whispering like a prayer. The mountain man stepped forward, placing himself between her and Crowder. His voice was low, steady, carrying through the snow. "She ain't yours. Not now. Not ever." Crowder's laugh was like gravel sliding down rock. "You think a rifle makes you strong? You don't know me. You don't know what I'll do to get back what's mine." The mountain man raised his rifle, not at the man, but at the iron hanging from his saddle. He fired. The shackle chain shattered in sparks and shards of iron, ringing like a bell through the valley. Crowder's horse screamed, stamping in the snow. The big man jerked the reins hard, glaring fire at the cabin. "That was your one warning," the mountain man said. "Next shot, don't aim for iron." Crowder's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward in the saddle, his words low but carrying. "You just made an enemy you can't hide from. Winter ends, mountain man, but I don't." With that, he yanked his reins and wheeled his horse back down the trail, snow spraying under its hooves. His shadow disappeared into the storm, but the echo of his words hung heavy in the cabin. The girl sank to the floor, trembling. "He'll come back. He won't stop until—" The mountain man lowered his rifle, set it back on its peg, and looked down at her. His voice was steady as stone. "Then let him key. Oh, winter's not done yet." The fire snapped in the hearth, throwing sparks like stars, as outside the storm howled louder, like the land itself was answering.